Hey guys, did you have one of these back in the day? Or this? Or maybe even one of these? If so, you're a real man and you can keep on watching. Now, you may remember the good old days before social media and microtransactions where you actually owned the things you paid for. How crazy is that? Mobile games from this era were far more primitive than some of today's titles, and playing Snake on your flip phone while wearing low-rise jeans was a perfectly normal way to pass the time way back when.
Talk about covering the nation. Nobody does it better than Singular Wireless, with the simplest and most affordable rate plans in the country.
Cell phones would go on to become a major part of our culture, but way across the pond, things were developing a little differently at this time. In the beginning, Japan was a huge leader in cellular technology, with many innovative features that wouldn't be adopted in other countries until many years later, including surfing the web, sending emails, and later 3G. Interestingly enough, this innovation later resulted in a phenomenon known as Galapagos Syndrome, where many of these highly advanced features were incompatible with foreign networks at the time, leaving the Japanese market struggling to get a foothold in the global market and developing in isolation. It's the reason why flip phones remained popular there long after smartphones have been around, and it's also the reason for why many early mobile titles never made their way out of the country. But thanks to the hard work of a bunch of awesome people in the Rockman community, we finally have access to some of the most obscure Japan-exclusive Mega Man games out there, and I'm really excited to check them out today. But before we do, I have to mention that while I was planning on talking about the 2 Battle Network games included in here, it was just announced at the time of this recording that the English translations are coming much sooner than expected. So instead of going super in-depth on these games, I'm just going to keep it brief and give my initial impressions, as you will probably be able to play these games by yourselves by the time the video is uploaded. Also, these games are in Japanese, so some of them might be hard to recommend to casual Mega Man fans if there are no plans to translate them. So in the meantime, I'm going to do my very best to introduce these games to you guys. The first game we're going to take a look at is Rockman Dash Great Adventure on 5 Islands, and I'm really excited for this one. The game was released in 2008 via the Japanese iMode service and is one of several mobile exclusive games in the Legend series. The premise is, as the title suggests, about 5 different islands which you can explore. The first 2 were available on release day, while the rest were later released as downloadable content. In this specific version that was resurrected, we only have clear data from the 5th island available, and to my knowledge we can't start a new game, which is unfortunate, but let's give it a shot anyway. The game is honestly pretty ambitious, with a full story and cutscenes weaved into the action, and the 3D visuals are similar to the PS1 games. It might not look like too much graphically, but you have to remember this was made for old flip phones, and with that in mind, I was pretty impressed with what it was trying to do. The gameplay is, as expected, simple and kinda clunky. I can't really speak to how well it would feel on an actual cell phone, but I'd imagine it would be kinda cumbersome to play on such a small keypad. Luckily, the action is a little slower to compensate for this, and there usually aren't too many enemies on screen at a time. The audio can also be kinda glitchy at times, but I'm sure this is just because I'm playing it on a totally real and legitimately obtained Japanese cell phone. Similar to the PS1 games, you have pseudo tank controls and can run, jump, shoot, and use a special weapon. The game also auto-locks onto enemies whenever you start shooting, which makes wrestling with the keypad to focus on moving enemies a little bit easier. You can also equip different parts to make Mega Man stronger, just like in the mainline games, and this specific save file has a lot of this stuff already unlocked, so that helps. At first I was very confused about why I was able to walk on the lava panels without taking damage, but this is the reason why. All the levels here are dungeons, which I guess is to be expected since it's the last island in the game, and all the environments are pretty big. Almost too big. They feel pretty empty for the most part, and they all look kinda similar, which can make the game feel repetitive at times. It's unfortunate, but considering the hardware limitations, I guess it's not too surprising. I also think that this might be alleviated if I were actually doing a fresh playthrough. Since this is an already completed save file, most of the treasure chests have already been opened and all the levels have already been completed, meaning you can't see any of the cutscenes or dialogue that would ordinarily help break up the gameplay. Also, interestingly enough, we have access to the final boss battle. At least I'm assuming he's the final boss. Hey, if you don't want to see spoilers for the final boss for any reason, go ahead and skip to the time written on the screen, okay? Cool. Basically, he's this robot dog thing, and his AI isn't the best, and he's honestly not particularly challenging in any way, except for the player controls. This is where the clunky movement really becomes an issue. The enemy runs so fast, it can be hard to adjust and get a lock on him, and avoiding his attacks quickly was way harder than it should have been. I got pretty close to beating him, but after a few tries, I really didn't want to have to deal with the awkward controls again, so I stopped it there. I'm sorry, guys. Overall, the gameplay definitely has its flaws, but it is an ambitious title and I respect it for what it's trying to do. I do think, however, that this would have been much better if it were released on a dedicated handheld console like the Nintendo DS or the PSP. There's definitely potential here and I would have loved to see more of it. Now, since I was only able to access the final areas without the story, the whole experience felt a little more monotonous than I'm sure it was intended to be, and I know I can't really give the game a fair shake like this. So based on what I've played, I would really love to see what the full game has to offer and check out the other areas. Mega Man Legends is still one of my favorite series and it was really cool to have the chance to play a new game. If the full version gets released in the future, I will happily revisit it and see if my opinion changes, but for now, I'm gonna give it a rating of
3.5 stars.
The next game we'll be looking at is Rockman GP, which is a racing game in the same vein as Battle and Chase for the PS1, although it's a lot simpler. You can choose between 3 characters, Mega Man, Roll, and Bass. The racing reminded me a lot of Hang On, and the controls feel pretty good here, honestly. There are also items for you to pick up, but unlike a game like Mario Kart where there's a variety of different item types, here the items are determined by which character you choose and will simply activate the character's special ability. So for example, if you're playing as Roll and you get an item, you'll unlock a speed boost. If you're playing as Mega Man, you'll get a bomb, and Bass gets invincibility frames. And Bass is by far the best in the game, since he's already the fastest and his iframes can be used to hit other players without slowing you down. There are also a bunch of different stages for you to unlock, but you can only play them with the character you use to unlock them, which I thought was weird, but maybe, I don't know, do other racing games do this? I don't know, leave a comment. Another odd thing I noticed is that if you play the time attack mode, you can't unlock any other stages and you'll just be stuck racing on the first level forever, whereas the versus mode is where the progression actually happens. Regardless of which stage you choose, they all have the same short loop as background music and there's no variety in the soundtrack. I know it's a small game running on very primitive hardware, but as you'll see later, there are games here that have quite a lot more variety with their sounds. Besides that though, it's really not a bad game. It plays exactly like you'd expect it to, and while I do wish it was more like the other handheld racing games I've played before, I think it gets the job done for what it is. I'm gonna give this game 2.5 stars. These phone games and their short audio loops that don't actually loop properly are so amusing to me. Rockman Bug Sweeper is a mobile version of Minesweeper with a fresh coat of Mega Man style paint applied to it. Visually, I like it a lot, and each stage has a different graphic style and the enemies change too. Each level also has its own soundtrack, which I thought was a really nice touch. Gameplay-wise, it's really just Minesweeper, and there's not a whole lot else for me to say about it, honestly. I actually low-key kinda suck at Minesweeper because I'm stupid and I don't like it for that reason. But I have to say, this is honestly a good choice for a mobile game, and I could definitely see someone whipping it out just to waste time on a train ride or something. Next up is Rockman Pinball, and while at first glance it looks like it's just a basic pinball game, it actually changes up the formula in a very interesting way that I wasn't expecting. The game has 3 stages, each themed after specific levels from Mega Man 2. You start off with this ordinary pinball setup, but you'll notice that each level has enemies that you can hit to score points, and there's also this wall that you can break. And once it's broken, you can launch your pinball through the opening and access the second part of the stage, which has a boss surrounded by a breakable wall. The goal of the game is to break it and deal enough damage to beat each boss in the game. It's honestly a really cool idea, and I've never seen a pinball game with progression like this. They did a really good job of making it feel like you're moving on to a new area in a platforming game. And that's where all of my compliments will end, unfortunately. Even though the level progression boss fight mechanic is really cool, I'm not sure it's the best fit for this kind of game. As expected, you don't really have a whole lot of influence over where the ball is going to go since it's bouncing all over the place because it's pinball. And so having this system in place where you have to shoot through this small opening in order to be able to progress means the gameplay often gets in the way of itself. It feels like a lot of the time you're just waiting for the ball to be in the right position for you to shoot it up, and if you ever drop it at any point, you have to start from the very beginning, which can be infuriating after several failed attempts. It also doesn't help that the bosses have way too much health. I spent so much time on the bosses just trying to beat them, and it never felt like I was ever doing enough damage. It'd help if there was like a health gauge or something, and of course it feels even harder because one wrong move and you're just back to the start. It honestly reminds me a lot of those viral rage bait games that you see people play on YouTube, and I was super uneasy the entire time I was playing this. Still, it does have some interesting stuff going on, and as a mobile game, I guess it's okay since it can be such a time sink, but I don't know, I really can't say I had fun with it. Maybe give it a try for yourselves and let me know what you think, but I really just couldn't get into this one. Okay, well, after that mess, I think we need a bit of a palate cleanser. And what better way to do that than by playing Mega Man 1? I mean, it can't be that hard to mess up the most basic game in the series, right? So what we have here is a demo version of the Mega Man 1 Cellphone port. One thing that's interesting is the full version lets you play as Roll like in Powered Up, but since it's only the demo we can't play that. I was a little worried that playing on a smaller screen would give it Mega Man Zero syndrome where, you can't see what's coming at you, but I really didn't have any issues like that. The main issue I had was the performance. The game stutters a lot and it can make some of the platforming feel super awkward, and I definitely do not want to even imagine what it would be like to play through Iceman stage on this version. The lag also affected the Mega Buster, and getting off multiple shots at a time felt pretty inconsistent. It's a shame too, because other than that, it's fine, the visuals are good, and as far as I can tell, the audio is exactly the same as the original. At first I was going to give these performance issues the benefit of the doubt, but supposedly this is the version that Capcom used to make their dreadful 2016 iOS and Android versions, which explains why they were so poorly received, and it kinda confirms to me that this is just the way the game feels, and it's not a good version to play. If you really need to play Mega Man 1, I'd still say you should just try playing any of the other countless ports out there, or even Powered Up. I'm sure playing as Roll would have been really neat, but even then, I really don't think it would have much of an effect on the performance issue, so with that in mind, I'm gonna give this game 1 star. Well, somehow that game was even worse than the last one, but this next game really did surprise me, and I was genuinely not expecting it to be as fun as it actually was. Rockman Panic Fire is a puzzle game released in 2003 for 300 yen a month. The premise is that you're playing through Dr. Wily's castle, and as you're progressing, you encounter Fireman, who goes berserk and starts chasing you around. He always moves in the opposite direction of the player, leaving a trail of fire behind him, and your goal is to escape each stage without getting hit. It's a very simple premise, but it's really fun. The game also introduces these bombs which will explode and destroy the room if Fireman touches them. And so you always have to be thinking about how your moves will affect the enemy's path, and the game can get quite challenging. I played through about 20 stages or so, and some of them really stumped me. Some of the levels are designed in a way that makes the solution super obvious, but others, not so much. You always have to be thinking a few moves ahead and plan your next one carefully, and the game has over 40 stages. I do wish there was a little more variety in the stage visuals though, and having more than one soundtrack like some of the other games we've looked at would have been nice, but honestly, this one was just so engaging and enjoyable that I really didn't care. This is a surprisingly good puzzle game, and I feel like for a mobile title, this one definitely has the most replay value out of all of them we've looked at so far. I definitely recommend this to anyone who either likes puzzle games or just wants a fun new Mega Man game to play. This one was great, 4 stars. And last but not least, we'll be taking a look at Rockman EXE, Phantom of Network, and its sequel, Legend of Network. The first game was released for AU phones in 2004, and it's a fully fledged Battle Network title for mobile devices. As much as I wish they'd have just made another GBA game, this one still has everything you'd expect from a game in the series, albeit with some compromises. You can't move land through the overworld like in the GBA games, and you instead have to navigate using these menus and decide which area to travel to. You can also talk to a list of NPCs from here, and you can ask Mega Man for hints, and the PET menu itself is similar to the GBA games, and the cyberworld is flat instead of isometric, which did feel weird to me at first, but I got used to it. I did notice that the cyberworld was a little too maze-like in some areas, and this coupled with the small screen space and very frequent encounter rate can make figuring out where you're supposed to go very frustrating. But besides that, the game does have some surprisingly authentic combat. However, you will notice that the battleships don't have their cool artwork anymore, but I think if you play through the other games, this won't be an issue for you. There's also no counter hit mechanic like in the mainline games, so you can tell they definitely had to cut a few corners in order to make this battle system work here. Still, the combat feels very familiar, and overall, it feels like a proper Battle Network title. I was super worried that they'd totally botch the combat and do something weird like, I don't know, do a complete overhaul and make it so you can only move on 3 squares and remove most of the fun gameplay mechanics that they've already developed in previous successful entries in the series or something. I don't know. But no, I still had a great time with it. It also wouldn't be a true Mega Man Battle Network experience without the story, and thankfully the game delivers here too. So much so that I honestly don't think I could talk about all of it without making a separate video for it. And for some reason, both games start you off by making you find a lost recipe. I wasn't even going to mention it in this video, but I just thought it was so weird that both games give you the exact same fetch quest towards the beginning of the game. But anyway, after things pick up, the story gets more interesting and it starts to do its own thing. And if you've ever seen the Rockman EXE Beast anime, you might notice that this game inspires some of the scenarios there. The sequel is also a big improvement, with an all-new story that takes place after Battle Network 6. This game was released after the last GBA game, and is the final game in the series, so there's a lot of uncharted territory here, and I think if you're a fan of the series, this one will be super interesting for you. The game also added in the Transarm system, which works a lot like the Soul Unison system from Battle Networks 4 and 5. There's also a version of the game with scrolling backgrounds in the net like in the GBA games, and apparently this will also be in the translated version. Overall, the game does feel much more polished, both visually and gameplay-wise. Navigating the cyberworld also felt slightly more cohesive and easy to navigate for me, with the main path in some areas being much more clearly distinguishable from their side paths. And I have to say, this game honestly feels right at home with the GBA games in the series. Both of these games felt very competent, and all things considered, I definitely think you should all give them a try. I'm super excited for the translated version to come out, and I'm sure you guys are too. You should definitely go ahead and try it out for yourselves. And there you have it. I'm really glad we could take a look at these Japan exclusive games, and I'd love to give a big shout out to the Rockman community and everyone who worked so hard to revive these previously lost games. I'm personally really excited to see the full version of 5 Islands, and I will also continue playing through the Battle Network games in my free time. For being released on flip phones, I was genuinely impressed with some of these games and how they navigated their respective hardware limitations. Hopefully this means we'll see more lost Mega Man games resurface as time goes on. And with that, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one.